Welcome to the Easier Way to Sell presentation of Close the Deal Without Selling. Here's your host and developer of the Easier Way to Sell, Ike Krieger.
Hey, this is Ike. If you're a new listener to the Close the Deal Without Selling podcast, I want to say welcome. And if you're a regular listener, I want to say welcome back. In this episode of the podcast, we're going to be covering the next guideline in the Easier Way to Sell set of guidelines. And this entry is be a problem solver. You've heard throughout the entire podcast that being a problem solver is the key to effectiveness in using this system. If you become a problem solver and solve the problems of others, your problems get solved. And I'll go into further detail about that inside of the episode. The next thing I'm going to be talking about is something that may seem like it's coming from left field, but it has to do with the authenticity factor of the easier way to sell. The topic we're going to be covering is platonic love. Now, I know you might go, platonic love? What is he talking about? What does that have to do with sales? Well, I think you'll find it very interesting that a doorway, as I call it, to authenticity is really platonic love. And if you can approach someone from the standpoint of, I really care about this person and I want to do what's right for them because of how I feel about them, you'll get a good taste of what it is that I'm trying to convey when I'm talking about platonic love. And finally, we have a great conversation with my friend Allan Langer, who is also a consultant and a sales trainer. And Allan and I are simpatico when it comes to sharing a kinder and gentler way to sell. And I think you'll find my conversation with Allan most enlightening. Well, enough of an introduction. Why don't we get into the meat and potatoes of the episode? Let's go. I developed a model for effective communication back in 1989. This systematic approach to communication happened to work wonderfully in selling. When I started to teach this system to sales professionals, it was known as Krieger training. And about 10 years later, I changed the name to Close the Deal Without Selling. And now, some 30 years later, the name of this training has morphed into what it really is, the easier way to sell. The name of the program has changed over time, but the model itself has gone through only a small amount of modification. For instance, in the last episode, I covered the easier way to sell guideline, think like a doctor. Included in that guideline is the term CAN, C-A-N, and these three letters help you create an environment in which you communicate by remaining curious, authentic, and neutral. And when I first created the model, it stood for curious, apart from the problem, and neutral. A minor shift, but a shift. Another shift that has taken place since the early days of teaching the system is I initially told clients to go into appointments with nothing but a folded blank sheet of paper and the quick system. If you've been listening to the early episodes of the podcast, you're aware that the letters in QUICK, Q-U-I-C-K, represent the 5 steps of the system. Q stands for qualify / disqualify. The U stands for uncover the problem. I stands for investment, meaning is there a budget for solving the problem? The C stands for capability. Can the person you're talking to make the decision to spend the money to solve the problem? And finally, the K stands for knowledge, and this reminds you to get the client to give you the information they've gathered from your conversation that led them to want to purchase your product, your service, or your idea. That's how QUICK works. There are pages and pages on this topic in the Close the Deal Without Selling Action Guide, and of course, it's available as part of your Close the Deal Club membership. Okay, back to going into an appointment with nothing but a folded blank sheet of paper and the quick system. I originally suggested to my students that they leave all their presentation material, even your briefcase, in the car or with the receptionist. Basically, I was suggesting that you go into an appointment totally unarmed. Now, I've altered this approach, and now I'm saying it's perfectly all right to take your presentation material in with you. Just put it aside and refer to it in your opening statement. And you can say something like, I was trained to give a presentation as soon as possible, but I'm not really sure if you have a need for what I'm offering. So I'd like to find out more about your situation, and you might have some questions for me. And based on my experience, within a few minutes, we'll both know whether or not there's a reason to move forward. Is that an okay way to start? Once you've gotten the information you need, you can either disqualify the prospect, or armed with that same information that you just gathered, you can then deliver a presentation that focuses on only that which the prospect believes they need to hear or see. A minor change, but a change nonetheless. One thing that hasn't changed is my definition of problem. One thing that hasn't changed is the role you must take on in order to make the system successful. And that role is one of a problem solver. You need to be a problem solver. And that's the fifth of the easier way to sell guidelines. Be a problem solver. Well, here we are in the third decade of the 21st century, and I'm constantly hearing business people introduce themselves and tell others how great of a problem solver they really are. You hear it all the time. I solve people's problems. I'll solve your problem. But the problem with that is, most of you listening to this have no clue what problem you solve because you were trained to talk about the solutions you provide. You've heard me refer to this process as show and tell selling. You may indeed solve your prospect's problem, however, the problem solving was not the focus of your relationship. So let's go over what it means to be a problem solver. First of all, let's get a common definition for the word problem. A problem is something that exists when there's a difference between your present state and your desired state. And more simply and maybe more elegantly stated, a problem exists when there's a difference between what you have and what you say you want. That's the definition for problem that I'm urging you to use. And let it be known that with this definition, a problem can actually be a good thing. Here's the example of a good problem that I've been offering up for all these years, and it still makes me smile. Okay, here's the problem. I'm frustrated because my yacht is too small. Now, that's a wonderful problem. But who would someone with that problem turn to? Who would the problem solver be? Well, a yacht salesman would be the problem solver. Now let's talk about business, because if you're a problem solver, you must figure out how that plays into your plan for success. For our purposes, we define business as the ability to solve other people's problems and get compensated for it. Isn't that what you do? If your prospect could solve the problem on their own, knew how to solve the problem on their own, or wanted to solve the problem on their own, they would have solved it already. But since they can't, don't know how to, or don't want to, they're looking for someone they believe will help them get from where they are to where they say they want to be. And that brings us to the final part of the problem solver equation, and that is closing or making the sale. You know, people hear the name of the podcast, Close the Deal Without Selling, and come to realize that close the deal really means make a sale. So, what is our definition of closing? Well, our definition of closing is the creation of a conversational environment in which your prospect comes to the conclusion on their own that your product or service will Yeah, solve their problem. And when that moment occurs, no more selling need take place because the prospect in their mind is visualizing your product or your service solving their problem sometime in the future. And please remember, if you're a water salesman, for instance, the problem you solve is not that you get people really good drinking water. The problem solved by the water salesman is that people are frightened of the quality of their water and they're worried that it might make them sick, especially after hearing all of the horror stories about water. That's the problem the water salesman solves. Or, as an insurance salesman, the problem you solve is not providing people money and death expenses. What problem does an insurance salesman solve? Well, she might say that the people I help are worried they won't have enough money to maintain their standard of living if the family breadwinner dies. I offer a service that makes that kind of problem vanish. Also, and maybe even more importantly, the mindset of a problem solver is much higher up on the happiness scale. Wake up in the morning and ask yourself, okay, what can I sell today? Is nowhere near as motivating as, okay, whose problem can I solve today? This calls for a shift away from selling as a means to solve your own problem and a shift toward solving the problem of your prospect. Rather than waking up in the morning and asking, okay, how much can I sell today? You get to ask, how many problems can I solve today? Much more invigorating. This simple shift in mindset is made easier by the fact that business is the ability to solve other people's problems and get compensated for it. If that's the case, then one of the main ahas of the easier way to sell reminds you that if you focus on solving the problems of others, what happens to your problems? They disappear. When you look at it that way, it makes this shift from salesman to problem solver a no-brainer. So, this guideline reminds you, be a problem solver. There's probably no need to remind you, but I'm going to do it anyway, that a good idea might be for you to join the Close the Deal Club. Go to our website at closethedealwithoutselling.com and find out all of the details about the club and see how it can help you learn the easier way to sell more easily. And as I like to say, the clubhouse doors are open, so come on in. In the previous segment, we looked at one of the ingredients of the YES formula called CAN. C period, A period, N period. And in this case, CAN stands for curious, authentic, and neutral. Focusing on the authenticity angle for a minute brings me to the conclusion that human beings have a difficult time expressing themselves authentically all of the time. There are moments in your life when you're authentic, and those moments may occur when you're with family, friends, or people around whom you feel totally comfortable. However, during our daily lives, we spend much of our time assuming roles that are anything but our authentic self. This is exponentially true when it comes to those of us who must sell for a living. In most cases, you, as well as other salespeople, receive a much smaller percentage of sales training than they do product training. And in most cases, people are taught how to sell the product that's featured within the company. And in most instances, this minimal training includes how to handle objections and basically how to close the sale. You were told to use the presentation and ABC, which is always be closing. That's the way I learned to sell. And all you have to do is just think of Alec Baldwin in the movie Glengarry Glen Ross. Few, if any, of these trainings approach your deals with the mindset necessary for both effective communication and effective selling. And of course, the mindset to which I refer is authenticity. When I first started to sell, I took on the role of a salesperson. I did what I thought a salesperson was supposed to do and did my best to come off as an effective salesman. Well, I was effective. I was good. I ended up teaching people how to sell the way that I did. And to these people, I say, I have regrets about prolonging your agony with the traditional way to sell. However, there are times in your life when you are truly authentic, and it's those times when you are really you. And I'll bet that one of those times is not when you sell. How can you be authentic with others when others need you to be authentic? Now, you want to enter into a type of conversation that produces the results that you say you want to produce as a problem solver. And for decades now, I've been attempting to teach how to access this authenticity, and my results are less stellar than I had hoped. Now, I've been looking for a way to increase authenticity that allows you to call up this state of being, and what I found is there is a doorway to authenticity, and this doorway has 2 words written on it: platonic love. Now, since you're a regular listener of the podcast, I have to figure that you know sometimes I go off on these strange tangents that seem to have very little to do with sales, but stick with me for a second. If authenticity is the key to making the easier way to sell a truly easier way to sell, then I invite you to listen carefully to the following. As I was doing additional research on accessing true authenticity, I came across an article on a website called A Conscious Rethink. There, I found an article about platonic love written by Sandra Alvarez, and rather than an overview of her thoughts, I thought I would just read some or most of it to you so you'll have an idea of what prompted me to offer platonic love as a valid solution to lack of authenticity. So, let's go through this new roadmap to authentic communication through the filter called platonic love. Is love the guiding light to a better life? Many people believe it is, and that little is possible without love as a motivator. Love is multifaceted and comes in many forms: parental, filial, romantic, and platonic. But what do we mean when we say platonic friends or talk about platonic love? What does a modern, healthy platonic relationship look like, and how do we keep it that way? Well, platonic love takes its name from the famous classical Greek philosopher Plato. And initially, Plato's dialogue was directed towards same-sex relationships, sexual and otherwise, but by the Renaissance, platonic love had come to encompass a non-sexual, heterosexual relationship we know today. Originally, platonic love was love that was not vulgar, meaning it wasn't centered on lust or fulfilling carnal needs. Instead, it was a love that inspired nobler pursuits and brought one closer to the divine. It brought about the best in both people. Clearly, today, this is no longer completely the case. In our secular world, a platonic relationship has basically become code for we're just friends, minus the benefits. In many cases, that person can end up being someone you'd go to the moon and back for, but you just have no romantic interest in or attraction to in any type of sexual way. And like its ancient origins, the expectation of a platonic relationship today is relatively the same. You would treat that person the way you treat a close friend. Platonic love provides a space where jealousy doesn't rear its ugly head, and hidden agendas and unrequited love are left at the door. It's rooted in genuine honesty and the ability to be yourself around a person without fear of censure or abandonment. And here are some characteristics of platonic love. A simple way to sum it up would be a good friend, full stop. The following 3 characteristics of platonic love will help you recognize it, manage your expectations of it, and keep that relationship happy and healthy and thriving for years to come. First, platonic love encourages unfiltered honesty. There's little need for deceit in a purely platonic relationship. Unlike a romantic relationship, there's no fear that the person will leave you because they were never with you in the first place. Platonic love isn't designed to spare someone's feeling because there's no need to maintain a facade. In some sense, this brutal honesty is great. In fact, it's often a relief. You can get insights and perspectives you wouldn't be able to get from a romantic partner. You can ask the unaskable questions and not have to worry too much about the status of your relationship. Platonic love is less complicated because you're not busy trying to keep up appearances and impress someone. Oh, that's so important. As a matter of fact, I'm going to repeat it. Think of this in sales. Platonic love is less complicated because you're not busy trying to keep up appearances and impress someone. Second, platonic love respects boundaries. While purely platonic relationships may have a no-holds-barred aspect to them because we don't hold our friends to the same standards as we do our lovers, that doesn't mean that there are no boundaries. Platonic relationships require, especially in the beginning, strong boundaries. And as you know, the easier way to sell system calls for boundaries in the form of mutually beneficial agreements. Next, platonic love has no expectations. When it comes to platonic love, you have to be careful not to expect or demand more of that person than you would of a regular friendship. Platonic love doesn't get held to the same high standards as romantic love. You get to go home at the end of the night and not worry about what the person is doing, who they're with, whether they've paid the electric bill, ate the dinner you left in the fridge, or hung the laundry out to dry. You may worry about them if they're going through a difficult time, as naturally good friends do, but you're not as invested in their day-to-day meanderings and external relationships. Now, to summarize, it's not complicated. Platonic love will always be a part of the human condition, and we award different values to every person we meet, and we love each one in a unique and authentic way. And recognizing and respecting those differences will bring us closer to Plato's initial ideal of platonic, one that raises us up and anchors us throughout life. While love might be fraught with complexities, living life through platonic affection is the one place where you can definitely say, it's not complicated. So keep your relationships honest, respect each other's boundaries, let go of expectations, and do what's best for them. Remembering these key 3 things will go a long way to a healthy and happy sales relationship. But how do you transfer these 3 keys into your sales relationship? Well, do exactly what we just talked about. Keep your relationships honest and curious. Set boundaries for your communication. Let go of any expectations that lead you to believe you can control the sale or the prospect. Remember to ask questions and listen with an intent to understand. And finally, what platonic love as a mindset offers you in a sales relationship is the ability to feel totally comfortable about doing what's best for your prospect. And that might call for you to help them solve their problem, and it might cause you to respectfully withdraw from a sales relationship. Personally, I believe this doorway called platonic love will lead you to authenticity, which helps you enter the conversational space most powerfully. It also helps you remain curious, authentic, and neutral while holding the commitment to solve their problem. To make it even simpler, how would you communicate with a prospect if they were truly a good friend, someone who you really loved, and you wanted to do only the best for them? That's the way to look at this. Okay, let's get right into our conversation with my friend and best-selling author, Allan Langer. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Close the Deal Without Selling podcast. I have a special guest today. You know, I'm in contact with sales trainers, coaches, and consultants from around the world. Some of them I'm sure you've heard of, and you probably have heard of our guest. But of all of the people that are involved in the world of making the place a safer and gentler place for salespeople, the one that I believe has a teaching that's closest to my heart is our guest, Allan Langer. So I want to make sure that all of you remember that name, and please, let's welcome Allan Langer.
Thank you, Ike. It's a pleasure to be here. And when I first saw your stuff, I thought exactly what you did. We are definitely aligned in our sales philosophies. That's for sure.
I think so. How do you cause a sale to take place, as I mentioned earlier, because the prospect wants to make it happen rather than dealing with the ingrained, I guess it would be the tradition of being an adversary to a salesperson, not realizing that they may indeed be there for you because we've been trained that's not the way. So I know that you came to a very similar conclusion. Tell us about how you came to that conclusion, that people are really not in the mood to talk to salespeople.
Well, in my book, I'll preface it with this.
Oh, please tell us about your book.
Yeah, so I wrote a book called The 7 Secrets to Selling More by Selling Less. It's actually right there behind me on the shelf. It became an Amazon bestseller.
Good placement.
I wrote the book because I had been in sales. This is my 26, 27 years, and most of it was in-home selling or B2C selling in the construction industry, windows, doors, things like that. And what I realized is when you join a company, you're going to go for the sales training. You have to go for the sales training, but it's really product training. It's like 95% product training and 5% what they call sales training. But sales training in the corporate world is how to handle objections, and here are your closing techniques, and go get them. And nothing has ever been taught about how to actually talk to the customer like a human being and not be adversarial. So when I decided to think like that, I said, you know what, why am I closing 65% and the rest of the team is closing 25%? What am I doing? Because I was changing things, but I wasn't like, oh, let me do this and write all these things down. But when I finally said, I'm going to figure this out, that's when I started coming up with these techniques that I was doing, that I started doing research on and finding out, wow, social proof. I didn't know I was doing social proof, but I am. Look at that. Or, I'm
very
doing this.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And but I wanted to know, why is it that people hate salespeople? And I did a study. It's the first page of my book. I wrote my entire book in a coffee shop. And for 2 weeks, I asked everybody that walked in the coffee shop this one question. I said to them, do you like meeting with a salesperson? Every single one. 231 people, everyone said no. It wasn't even like maybe or yeah, sometimes. Everyone emphatically, no way, I hate salespeople. So I was like, why is that? And I did a lot of research on and why that is. And it's because the training has been so terrible since the dawn of time. And salespeople are thought of as the people who you can't trust, and they're going to rip you off. Unfortunately, that's the perception. About
now 12 years ago, I had a partner who was a marketing specialist, and we did a 5-minute on video sales coaching called 5 for 5. And you could get 5 minutes for $5, and we signed people up, and I'm thinking of putting some of them back online now. But one of them that we did, we went to the San Diego Zoo. And we did an interview of people going in and asked them, what's the first word that comes to mind when I say salesman? And that's our opening to the 5-minute thing. And what's really sad is that when I asked that question of salespeople, trainees, consulting clients, their answers are just as bad. And it amazes me that a lot of the people that we deal with can sell anything at all based on their internal dialogue. How do you deal with that?
Well, it's the other part. It's the other half of it. It's like we as salespeople don't like to meet with salespeople. It's crazy, and And what I saw, and when I started training and riding with reps, is you turn into a different person when you start the sales conversation.
Yes.
And that's the problem. It's like you don't stay yourself. You become the sales guy. You become the robotic, like, okay, I got to do the pitch. I got to talk like this. People change their voices. They sound, it's almost like the TV personality talking normally. And then when he's on air, he turns into the TV personality. We do the same thing as salespeople. And that's the worst thing you can do. Just be yourself and be there to help the person. And it's just amazing how many salespeople just change. It's like they turn into the sales guy or the sales gal, and it just doesn't work anymore. It really doesn't.
And what that does to them emotionally is one of the things that I deal with, because most of the people I talk to are just frustrated as hell with selling, because it's not who they are. And right. I grew up as in the world of entertainment. And I did a lot of acting. And when I first started selling in the mid 1970s, I just took it on as a role. And it hits right to what you said, because I wasn't being me. Mm-hmm. I was being a salesperson, or what I considered to be, which at that time was something that either Tom Hopkins or Og Mandino or later on Alec Baldwin, A, B, C. So, that's who we were trained to be. And that's so tough. How effective have you been in getting people to, I shouldn't ask how effective, because I know you've been effective, but what has been the most effective way that you've gotten people to realize that their authentic self is their ticket to ride?
Well, it really comes down to a mindset change. And, this doesn't sound particularly, rocket science like. It's pretty simple, but nobody thinks this way, is just change your mindset to helping the customer rather than selling the customer. If you actually are okay with not making the sale, you'll then be more yourself. And so many reps, I get this question a lot. What was the best sale I ever made? And I always say the best sale I ever made was the one that I didn't make, because that sale that I didn't make turned into a incredible sale 6 months later from a referral.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have been able to do that if I just was like the sales guy, just trying to make the sale no matter what. I went in there. I always went into every appointment just ready to help the person, whether that meant selling them a window, selling them a door, or fixing their screen, or saying, you know what, we're not the right company for you. Whatever it was, I felt good about myself because I was myself. And more importantly, the customer felt good about me, whether they bought from me or not. That's the big thing.
So what I'm hearing is one of the things that you need to do is make a commitment to a shift in who you are when you go out to sell, and just be there for the prospect. They may become a client now, they may become a client later, they may not become either. You never know. What were your biggest challenges in teaching people to do what you do? Because a lot of times you'll ask someone who's looked at as a super salesperson, and you ask them, what do you do specifically that gets you all those sales? And they go, I don't know, I'm just good. Yeah. So the question then becomes, when you deal with people, how do you actually help them become more authentic? What is the support system? I think our listeners would love to hear something that they can do that will, or think about, that will help them maintain that.
Yeah. I mean, that's what the 7 secrets are about, is really
get the book. Get the book.
Get the book. Buy the book. That's it. End of the podcast.
Read the book. Yes. Enough.
It's obviously changing your mindset. There's a mindset change individually from selling to helping. There's a mindset change I teach companies where they should get rid of the term closing percentage and turn it to helping percentage. It's amazing if you actually do that. Okay. If you're a company, and instead of having closing boards, you have helping boards. So instead of saying I closed 41% this month, I helped 41% of my clients this month. It just changes everything mentally for you as a sales rep, and it changes the tenor of the company as well. But then there's so many things you can do psychologically as a human being. Like sales is psychological, but most reps use sales as adversarial instead. They're just trying to figure out techniques to make the customer say yes. And here's a closing techniques. Oh, wait a minute. Let me just look at this objection handling technique. This is number 17. I have to respond with this one, rather than just saying, well, here's a human being in front of me who lives in a colonial house and they're looking for these products. Why don't I talk about the other colonial houses that use the same exact products? Social proof. Reps don't do that. They're talking about themselves. They're talking about the company. They're talking about the product. You know, one of the things I train, and people look at me like I have three heads, is I tell them never lead with the product you sell, lead with the problem that you solve. So people say, well, what do you sell? And they would expect me to say, well, I sell windows. I'm like, no, I never sell windows. I sell the solution to your drafty living room. No. I sell the solution to lower your energy bills. Oh, and how do I do that? By the way, here's a window that's going to help with that. But I don't sell this window. I'm selling that solution to your problem.
Bless you, my man, because if you ask most salespeople what problem they solve, they tell you what they do. And yes. Your ability to solve the problem stems from your ability to recognize it as what it is. I don't know if you saw, I have some definitions based on the word problem that I came up with in, 1989. I was taking a seminar and it just piqued me in that a problem exists when there's a difference between what you have and what you want.
Correct. Yes.
Business is the ability to solve other people's problems and get compensated for it. Mm-hmm. And closing is the ability to create an environment in which your prospect comes to the conclusion on their own that you can do what? You can solve their problem. And when that happens, you don't need to sell. And you don't need to give a presentation, because as they're telling you how and why they see what they saw down the street in that colonial is what they want, you go, oh, great. In addition to that, what else? It's so smart to do that. Mm-hmm. What brought you to the idea of understanding that the problem was the solution?
I mean, obviously a lot of reading, a lot of trial and error, a lot of, you'd listen to the training. I remember the first appointment I ever ran after window training. They teach us, and there's still reps doing it today. They teach us to use what they call a heat lamp demonstration. You ever hear about this thing?
My friend Larry does that.
Yeah, it's like the French fry warmer. It's a big red light and you put it on the glass. It's such a gimmick, and I pulled it out and I was in this house, the very first appointment, and I felt like P.T. Barnum. I'm like, what am I doing in my head? I'm thinking this, and I'm thinking this. Imagine what the customer's thinking. Like, I'm doing this ridiculous sales demonstration. 17 years later, I never took another heat lamp out ever.
Good for you.
And I would tell you, more than 50% of my sales, I never took a window in the house.
Good for you.
Because it wasn't about the product. It was about, we're just here to solve the problem, and the product's going to do that. But don't worry. Everyone knows everyone's got a good window. But if you walk in talking about your window, you're not talking about their problem. So, but the other thing I realized is, and I know you asked me how I got to this, and the best way I can answer that.
All right, what you're saying is so valuable.
It just, things came to me. There's two things I'll say in regard to that. One is, even when you get to the point where you said the customer makes the decision on their own that they want to do it, there's still one small other hurdle, and that's the anxiety of making the purchase. Quite often the customer wants to do this, but of course, anytime you buy anything, anytime you're parting with money, it's called purchase anxiety. Your body gets anxious. It's like the example I use is, if you're in a supermarket and you've got a full load you got a cart full of groceries, and you're online and you feel anxious. You're like, oh my God, how much am I spending on groceries? You get sweating. So what do? You take out a bag of chips and a pack of gum. And you put it on the counter. You lowered your price by about $2, but you relieve the anxiety. The action relieved the anxiety. So what I used to do is when I got to the point where I knew that they wanted it, but they were still anxious about the price, you just acknowledge the anxiety. So you know what? I know you're feeling anxious right now, are you? Yeah, I am, Al. I said, well, it's totally fine. Everybody feels anxious when they want to buy something. Just know that the anxiousness will go away because you know you're making the right purchase with all the stuff that we spoke about to get you to this decision.
In the for what it's worth department, and we'll cover this over another cup of coffee, that part of the sales conversation had me so upset that I realized that you can't get upset with people for doing something you didn't tell them they weren't allowed to do.
Correct.
And so I came up with a set of guidelines before the sale starts, that tells them that we're going to talk about price and we're going to go over all of that. And if it turns out, and you're going to be the decision maker on this, obviously, that this is not something with which you feel comfortable, we're just going to stop right then. And then later on, have you ever taken any NLP courses?
A few, but years ago, but nothing that I can speak of. Future
pacing, which is exactly what it says. You put people in a mental state of being sometime in the future and ask for their response. And you go like, I understand that, you told me that this is right at the level that you can spend and you're feeling a little anxious on it. Here's the question that I have. If we look ahead 1 month, 6 weeks from now, you've used the product that's made you happy, and you think, my God, I hope I spent the right amount. What are you going to tell yourself that makes you know that you spent the right amount? And so if they tell you at that point, you basically planted, oh, my mother, God rest her soul, she hated when I said this, a post-hypnotic suggestion that they recall at that moment during their communication with self. So I do not believe in letting sleeping dogs lie. I want them to explain to me in advance what they're going to do when they get anxious about the price.
Right. That's a great point. It really is.
And that's the approach in this. And I listened to one of your broadcasts with a gentleman who was talking about objections. And I thought that they were marvelous, again, in the traditional way. The approach that I found goes great with our style of selling is when you talk to people, you talk about the objections up front and tell them that of all things, you really want to avoid maybe, or I want to think about it, because in most cases, when a prospect tells you maybe, or I want to think about it, it's just a polite substitute for what? And you wait and they tell you no. When you, it's a polite substitute for what, they say no. So what they've done is they've taken maybe, or I want to think about it off the table for themselves. Then you relieve their anxiety by going, hey, if you need to think about something, or, you really need more information, please let me know and I'll help you. I just want to avoid using it as a substitute for no. Is that an agreement we can have? And they go, oh, yeah. And you never hear that again. As a matter of fact, once you get them into the mode of explaining how important it is for them to solve their problem, you avoid objections altogether because they're the one giving the presentation. So
absolutely,
that's the thing that, that's the crux of what I share. But the authenticity side and the stuff that you talk about, that is such an important part. I have the little tactic for the meeting.
Right.
You have the mindset for making the meeting something special. Tell us more. I've been talking too much. I got excited.
No, that's okay. And for me, when I get objections at this point, and when I got objections before I started my own consulting company, I knew one of two things were happening. One, I screwed up somewhere. I didn't make them feel comfortable on something, or I missed something, or I kind of went too quickly on something, or I missed a piece of body language that they were showing me that I didn't notice, or something like that. I mean, I have a whole chapter on body language in my book. Or the only thing that's making them say I'm going to think about it is the anxiety. Because think about it. We walk into a store. And you walk into a department store and the sales associate comes up to you. Hi, can I help you? What's the first thing out of your mouth? No, I'm just looking.
Only looking. Lying
I'm
is
just
okay
looking.
to salespeople, yeah.
And you don't even know why you said it. You said it because you're putting up the defense mechanism because it's a salesperson. If someone said, why did you say, I'm just looking, you wouldn't be able to answer. You're like, I don't know, because I actually do need to know where the jeans are, but I'm going to find them myself because I don't want to talk to the salesperson. So
That's so true.
It's the same thing when you're presenting. I mean, I used to sell sunrooms before I sold windows. I'd have to sell a $50,000 sunroom in 2 hours. And that's an anxious decision. But what you would have to do, and this is what I learned with sunrooms, is when you put someone in the position, like you talked about the future thinking, or you put someone you give them the emotional feeling of what it's like to own your product before they own it. And again, this is a great example. Sunrooms. Oh my God. Talk about product dump. When I got hired by the sunroom company, it was 10 days of training, 10 straight days of training. The first 9 days were all about the product. I can tell you more about a sunroom than I can tell you about my kids. I mean, just aluminum and screws and glass and roof thickness and everything you wanted to know, and test after test of all the product. And then the last day they told you, okay, this is the sales process. So every rep would go into a house and they'd spend 2 hours on this incredibly detailed, boring product demonstration. And I learned very quickly when people's eyes were glazing over, I'm like, this is not working. I'm closing like 12%. The whole company was closing 15%. I started to say, I left my bag in the car. I never brought anything in. I'd say, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, tell me what you want. They would say, imagine sitting in your backyard, looking through your beautiful new sunroom with a cup of coffee, watching the birds. How would that feel? I just show them a picture in a catalog. Where do I sign? Never talked about aluminum or roof thickness ever again, unless it was an engineer. And if you can do that, if you sell whatever you sell, windows, imagine sitting on your couch and not having that draft on the back of your neck. They don't need to see a window when you say that. They imagine that. They're like, I want that. It's emotion. And when you can do that and forget about how long the company's been in business, forget about your grandfather started it with his Uncle Tony in Maine, forget about all that stuff. It's about the customer and them envisioning owning your product and solving their problem.
I tell people that one of the best ways to approach selling in this vein is to think like a doctor. And
I love that. Yep. I love you put that quote, you put that comment on my LinkedIn thing today. I loved it. Yep.
Yeah. And that's just one of my pets, because aside from the fact that a doctor conducts the type of interview that I champion, a doctor is a perfect example of someone who avoids giving information. Can you imagine, again, if you have a broken bone and you go to the doctor and they start telling you, before I do the x-rays or before we take a look at you, let me tell you where I went to school and the fact that my family's in medicine and that we all came through this program, which I'll be happy to explain to you. But first, I want to talk to you about the awards that my nurses have won. What would you do? I'd go, thanks, doc. It's so when you decided to have this conversation with me, what were you hoping would happen? I want my foot fixed. Great. Let's move on that, and
I'm going to, with your permission, Ike, I'm going to do a skit on that on my next video.
Good. Yeah. Well, same thing about here's some pills. You should take these, proven they work, but you don't know what I have. Yeah, but they work.
Yeah. Exactly. Here's a window. Wait, I want a door. I don't want a window. It's the same thing.
Yeah. They're all for ingress and egress, aren't they? What do you do for closing?
Well, if you do it right, it's almost like I like to say that the concept of helping the customer, that conversation, the natural genesis of it is them buying the product. It's really not like I need to do a closing technique. It's simply asking the question. Now that is something that many sales reps, especially solopreneurs and young business owners, one of the biggest problems, I actually saw a study on this. I think it was 78% of business owners fail to ask for the order during a sales call because they don't want to. And the reason is they don't want to sound or feel like a salesperson. So instead, they want to be passive and like, oh, give me a call next week. Let me know. Think about it. And you can't be that either. So you can't go from that extreme to the other extreme. But when you have a normal conversation and they know that you're there to help them and they envision what it's like to own your product, it's simply say, what do you think? You want to get started? I mean, it's not like what's our next step? You want to get started? How does this sound? We can be out here in 2 weeks. All of those very confident, non-sales sounding.
Yeah.
What's that?
Assumptive closes.
Yeah. It's just like, quite often it's almost like when I would sell something, I never asked the question, okay, so you're ready to buy? Like you're ready to sign here? It would always be just almost a continuation of a conversation. So this sounds good, right? How do you want to pay for this? Yeah, let's just do the financing.
That's
it's literally that's it. Yeah.
And if you can set that up in front and go, and here's what we're going to discuss. And when we come to this point, if we get that far, we'll discuss how you plan to pay for it and everything else. But it's premature now because I'm not sure yet what it is that I have that you might want.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. We need to know all that stuff. And, you walk in right away and like, well, I had this coupon or I know it's going to be this amount of money off and stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Hold those to the end. We'll get to that in a minute, but let me figure out what you need here.
Well, I tell people that they need to stop doing their sales presentation. I think you come up with a very similar conversation, and the same thing in terms of not bringing in your information or your briefcases. And now I've altered that a little bit. I bring it in and I threaten them with it by putting it in there and going, my company really likes when I come in and do a presentation or a demonstration as quickly as possible. But I'm not sure yet that you even need what it is that I have. So if it's okay, I got a couple questions I'd like to ask. And, if we need anything, the stuff's over there. But for right now, let's just have a conversation. Mm-hmm. And it diffuses that because they're going, what's in the briefcase and how much is it going to cost me?
Yeah. Or they're like, oh, here comes the sales guy again. I told you, honey, we shouldn't have had him come over. I told you.
I warned you, Cecile. I warned
you. Yeah, here he comes. Or one of them will just leave, go through the back door because they don't want to deal with it. And I would start almost every conversation with, just so you know, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I'm not here to give you a sales demonstration. Let's just find out what I'm here for. Tell me why I'm here. You called me. Tell me why I'm here. And immediately the walls get thinner or they come down because they're expecting, they got the guard up. Okay, here comes a sales guy. I gotta make sure I protect myself. And it starts on the wrong foot every single time.
I'm just so happy you start off with a problem statement rather than talk about the problem, about the draft. I go, a lot of people I've worked with just go nuts because they'll be in their nice, secure house and they're feeling drafts on their necks. How big of an issue is that for you? And if they go, well, it's not. Well, tell me, what is the biggest issue? Just prime the pump. So here's the question that always gets me interested, and that's what's the worst piece of sales advice you've ever been given?
Oh boy, there's a lot of those. You mentioned Tom Hopkins, and years ago, I saw him live. And is he still alive, by the way? Is he still kicking?
I don't know. He's alive in my heart because
he was a good guy, but he was the old time sales guy with the suit and the carnation in his pocket and everything. But
I did that for years.
Yeah, I remember him saying something about contracts that what he said was, don't use the word contract, use the word agreement, which I actually agree with that. But he said, take the pen out and put the contract in front of them and put the pen on the contract. And I was like, holy crap, I would never do that. This back then when you had to sign things. And it just seems so salesy. And it's like, it reminded me of the used car pressure where they put the contract in front of you. Here's the pen, sign tonight kind of thing. And he's like, the pen will let them know that you're there to do business. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's going to scare the crap out of them too. I just remember that being pretty bad advice.
So put a pen on the contract and give it to them is the worst piece of advice you've gotten.
Yes.
All right.
That's the one that's the one that's popped in my head right away. Yeah.
Okay. Because I guess I can see that from we're going to do business. You do realize that here.
Yeah, exactly. But he made it sound like before the customer even had a chance to think or have a conversation, while the price is out, you bring the price out, you just take the contract out and put it in front of them. That's what I remember anyway.
I just remember from Tom, I think he called them tie downs.
Yeah. Yep.
That would be good, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You can see what I'm talking about, can't you?
Can't you? Isn't this what you'd like to see in your home?
Isn't it?
Isn't it?
Yeah. What did he call those? Trial closes. That is what he called them.
Yes. I do have another really bad piece of advice that just popped in my head.
Good. I was hoping it would prime your pump.
Yeah, I remember. So I worked for this really large home improvement store that will remain nameless, but I sold windows, siding, and roofing for them early in my career. And the entire branch, it was about 200 of us in this branch. I think the average, the branch closing percentage was like 22%. It was pathetic. And I was around at that point, maybe 35 or 40%. So I was one of the better ones. So the head sales VP brings in the corporate sales, like Alex Baldwin guy comes in from Atlanta. There's a hint on where this company is from. So the Atlanta guy flies in to the sales meeting. There's 200 of us there. And just like Alec Baldwin, I'm not kidding, he's yelling at us for a half hour, just yelling about our terrible closing percentage. And I remember him saying this very specifically, and I put this in my book. He said, it is your obligation to this company to approach every customer that we visit and say the same exact sales presentation, word for word, every single time. Because if you do it that way, this has been written and this has been vetted, and this is the sales process. And if you deviate from it, you are not honoring your obligation to this company. You need to do the same exact presentation to every single customer you meet.
And if you're at all religious, you won't go to heaven.
And yeah. And I remember as a young guy in his 20s thinking, what? And I put in my book, it's like you said, here's the medicine. Well, yeah, I have to tell you what's wrong with me yet. It's like giving the same medicine to everyone that walks in the hospital without asking them what's wrong. It doesn't make any sense. And that's why the branch was closing at 25%, because that's what everybody was doing. And they were afraid not to do it. They were like, oh, if I don't do this, they might find out that I'm not. And they were just a bunch of robots visiting people in their homes.
Well, I use the baseball analogy for, what's the difference between a 270 hitter and a 310 hitter? And it's $5 million a year in average salary.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And it's only for 4 more safe hits out of every 100 tries.
Right.
And in sales, that's what I set this system up to, was to I tell people, I'll increase your sales by 20 to 50% within 6 months to a year. And it's true, because if you're doing 2 sales to raise your average by 50%, you need 1 more.
Right.
And for most of these people, it's in their language. If they just adjusted their language, they would close that sale anyway, because there's that sale that's always out there where you go, I thought I had that sale.
I thought I had that one. Where
happened?
Right.
And with this system, you are more likely to get those sales. And that's just what I tell people. And they can't do it unless they're authentic and they're doing the things that you're talking about, including representing the world of selling in a different way.
Right. Exactly. Because once you become the salesperson that people want to meet with, like, they realize, like, you're a breath of fresh air. Like, oh my God, it's like meeting the car salesman that you actually like. Like, you call everyone when you get home. You call your neighbors, your family. I met a great car sales guy. You go see him if you need a car, because they're so not used to meeting a salesperson who's going to be honest and really be in it for the customer, that once you are that person, you become referred and you become the top guy very quickly.
And you know what? I can just hear the person saying, well, what made him so great? And the person responding, well, he didn't try to sell me anything.
Exactly. Right.
And
exactly.
To get to the point where, that's what I call my podcast. It's Close the Deal Without Selling, which is, it's based on, can you have this authentic conversation with somebody that has them be honest enough with you to go, I really could use the type of service you provide, or, I really don't have a need for that, and say it authentically enough that no is not a request for more information. No is a signal that, oh, good, I don't have to spend more time on this because it's not going to happen now.
Right.
And
exactly.
when you can get to that in your communication, because, this is a model that I've developed, a model that you've developed, it's something that someone can use and go, oh, this will make my life easier, which, I came out of retirement to do this silly podcast, and it's silly, but here I was sitting after 10 years out of the game with all of my information sitting in boxes. And I went, you know what? Here I am, a baby boomer, and I get to have a worldwide radio show.
There you go.
And I get to have guests like Allan Langer. Yippee. Before we start wrapping up, would you please share with our listeners how to reach you, how to get in touch with you? Because I'm going to tell everybody again to buy your book and
Awesome.
Go look at what Allan's doing. You know that I'm in this to contribute, and by sharing Allan with you, I hope you feel that's a contribution, because everything that I've read of his and everything that I've heard it's contributed to me. So how do you get in touch with you?
I really appreciate that. So there's really just two ways. It's my website, which is allanger.com. It's AL and then LANGER, allanger.com. But a neat thing that I found, and I have it, it's called my flow page. I don't know if you ever heard of flow page. You just go to FLOW.page, flow page /Allan Langer, ALLAN Langer. And every link that I have in the entire world is on that page. It's my book. It's my website. It's my nonprofit with my daughter. It's my LinkedIn, Facebook. It's everything is on that one page with a little description and a way to send me a message. So flow.page /Allan Langer, and Allan is ALLAN, LANGER. And that has everything. So you can go one-stop shopping and you can find everything on me.
I was going to ask for one tip that would get everybody going, ooh, that was good, but you just did it.
Yeah, go to flowpage.com. It really, it's like Linktree for Instagram, but Linktree is like a bunch of different weird letters and stuff. This actually has your name in it. And I just think it's better. It looks better and it's easier to get to. So yeah, that would be my tip, is set up a page on Flowpage, and then you can just have that one link that goes to all of your stuff.
Excellent. That is a great tip. Is there a sales tip that we haven't discussed that would have everybody respond accordingly by going, yeah, that was great?
Well, I would suggest, and this has always surprised me, there's a lot of books out there on body language, but there's not a lot of books out there on sales body language. And that's why I have a whole chapter in my book about body language. But what I would do is get yourself a book on body language and read it, because so many sales that I've had in my career were saved because I read the body language the right way. And if I missed it, if I just kept plowing through and not paying attention to what I was looking at, they would not have been sales. So even if you pick up one little thing, a pursed lip, the way they crinkle their eyes, something like that, the way they scratch the back of their neck. If you pick up one little thing and you say, oh, that's a negative sign, I got to figure out why they did that, and you adjust the conversation, that could turn from a demo no sale to a sale. So my last piece of advice is get yourself a good body language book.
That's great. Do you know my friend Rhonda Scherer?
Sounds familiar. I don't know.
All right. Well, she's she's also a very well-known consultant and a LinkedIn specialist, but she was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and she blindsided me with a conversation that she's a face reader. And we had a conversation about her being a face reader and how that's made a difference. And now you're mentioning this. So to all our listeners out there, become a whole body listener.
Yeah. Watch the body language and you will be amazed on what you see.
Well, one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I had to leave because I just was too cold all of the time. And I've been out here for now close to 45 years. I'm still cold. So when people see me with my arms folded and they go, "Oh, he's closed off," I just tell them, "No, I'm cold."
No, I'm cold. Yeah. The misnomer is crossed arms means you're closed off. It could mean a lot of different things. You have to look at the rest of the body and not just one piece. It's like right now I'm very comfortable because I just don't feel like slouching. So I just cross my arms. Doesn't mean I'm closed off. So you got to watch the whole body.
Yeah, well, I'm watching your whole body of work, and I'm really enjoying it. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to come and be our very special guest on this episode of the Close the Deal Without Selling podcast. And on behalf of all of our listeners and from me personally, I just really want to say thank you, Allan.
Well, it's been an honor to be here, Ike, and thank you for all of what you have contributed to the sales world over the years. So
I appreciate you saying
I
that.
appreciate that as well. So thanks for having me on.
Great. Take care.
All right. Have a good one.
Well, that'll do it for episode 57 of the Close the Deal Without Selling podcast. I trust you enjoyed my conversation with Allan as much as I did. In our next episode, we'll be moving to the next entry in the Close the Deal Without Selling guidelines, which is know the problem that you solve. We've come to the conclusion that to take on the role of problem solver is the best way to approach the easier way to sell. However, even with the greatest mindset of being a problem solver, you still have to know the problem you solve, and we'll be discussing that in our next episode. Until then, this is Ike Krieger. See you next time.